Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caravel, and I'm here with Bob Laliberte. Bob, it is it's like June 9th. It's hot outside. Summer is almost here, so that must mean one thing: Cisco Live.
That's right. Absolutely. Back to Vegas.
That's the only thing that now that Cisco has gotten so big, the only downside to that is there's no other venues for Cisco Live other than Vegas.
Yeah, it was right. Great turnout this year. 19,000 some odd attendees, I think, right?
Yeah, and you toured the World of Solutions, right?
I actually did not.
Oh, well, I can tell you that this is the biggest World of Solutions that I remember. Like they've been big in the past, but I don't remember one that was this big. It took a long time just to walk around. So the number of partners that are working with has obviously gone up, and that's obviously good to see. So.
Absolutely. I think, and that's just indicative of even this year's Cisco Live, right? The number of announcements, the number of different solutions that they have is increasing year on year. And this year was certainly, I think, I think I commented in just even one of my tweets, it was hard to even keep up as they were kind of coming at you rapid fire, one after the other, all during the keynotes.
Yeah, the good thing about these announcements, though, and you're right, there was a lot of announcements. But what was interesting, though, it wasn't your typical barrage of boxes. Here's our new Catalyst. Here's a new Meraki AP. Here, here's our new UCS server. There was very little in the way of new hardware announced. It was the firewall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But all the product announcements tended to focus on cross-product integration, right? So, for instance, last Cisco Live in 2022, they announced the Cisco Security Cloud, which was actually the coming together of Duo, Umbrella, Talos, all these other things together. And similarly, this year they announced the Cisco Networking Cloud, which again is meant to roll up all those other, Cisco products, right? And make it easier for customers to deploy. So this is something the company's been talking about a long time. It seems like after years and years and years, they finally got to the point where they can actually take all these disparate products and bring them together. And so let's start with there. What were your thoughts on the network cloud, Cisco Network Cloud?
Yeah, I thought that was great. I mean, just like you were saying, I think the overall theme for me was around simplification and unification. And it's almost as if they've taken a breath and looked across and said, okay, here's what we've created over the last number of years, 20 years, whatever it is, and saying, how do we drive a better, simplified, unified solution for our customers? And so, like I said, they're moving to these platform approaches like the security cloud, now moving to their network cloud vision, which is to take all those, the multiple platforms that they have across so many different domains and tie all those together. And I thought the interesting piece was it wasn't just solely focused on the network domains, but also hinting at the fact that they would be tying in that security cloud with it as well. So really, I think trying to, when you think about these modern environments that are so much more complex and distributed, the need to drive that operational efficiency is going to require these platform approaches that are driving the unification of all these different platforms that they currently have. So I think it was a really big, important step for them to take.
Yeah, and it fits nicely with some of the other stuff they've been doing on the marketing side, right? They've got the whole of It's Connected, It's Protected campaign. Yeah. You ran with the tagline here, if you securely, the exec said this over and over, if we securely connect everything, anything's possible. Right. Now, the caveat to that is that you can actually securely connect everything, right? And if you're trying to securely connect everything, you've got 4 different network platforms and 8 different security platforms. That's a much different challenge than having one security, one network, and tying the two together. In fact, during his keynote, I'll read this out here. John Davidson said, to transform IT, we have to conquer the complexity we have created over the last several decades. Yeah. And then he talked a little bit more about that. And he said, if we securely connect everything, then anything is possible. And so that all fits together, right? You can't, the way it was set up before, if half my network's Meraki and half my network's Catalyst, and I've got a bunch of different security platforms, actually securely connecting everything, have the confidence that it's securely connected is a lot of heavy lifting for the IT pro.
Right. And in today's digital economy, you can't afford slowdowns in deployments. Right. So if you're going to connect things securely, the other adage I think there is that it's always been historically, there's always been that trade-off between the security stack and the network performance. And those are things that just aren't, you can't afford those trade-offs anymore. It's got to be secure. It's got to be performant. It has to be connected, and it's got to be done quickly. So I think they're really looking at that and understanding that and trying to put together the platform approach that will enable organizations to really accelerate the adoption of that secure connectivity.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about the speed at which businesses work with G2, and I talked about this. That I'm not sure if they had done this a decade ago, even 5 years ago, it would have been as meaningful as it is today, because IT pros then did have bigger, longer leashes, and you could take the 6 months or whatever to make your changes, where today you don't, right? And so,
Yeah. It's, and I think a lot of that's being driven by the changes in the application world, right? I mean, that's really what's powering all these businesses, or the new applications they're rolling out. So as you went from waterfall to agile to now DevOps and microservices and all that stuff, right? Things just happen at so much of a faster pace today that the infrastructure can't continue to be the roadblock. It's got to be an enabler, right? So everyone talks about, just give the developers the guardrails that they can safely operate in and let them go as fast as they can. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here with these platform approaches and that unified policy management and things like that across network and security, is ensuring that those developers are able to develop and to create these applications as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, and so if you're watching this and you missed the news, what Networking Cloud is it's really a roll-up of all their other security products with a common operating model. And what that lets you do is you can have one common set of hardware now. And if you prefer the Meraki managed cloud model, you can use that. And if you prefer CLI, I believe you can still use that, or you can use Cisco Spaces, which is old DNA Spaces names. And so I do like the fact that they're not, the way Cisco was structured before, if you were a Catalyst person, you had religion around that, and the other way didn't work. And if you were Meraki, that was true. And now it's about customer choice. And I think having that singular leader for both service provider, cloud networking, on-prem networking under John Davidson, actually it has been a big catalyst to drive that change.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, on both counts, right? One, having the singular leader to help drive that unified approach is going to be key. And I think that also, organizations have to drive that greater level of operational efficiency and be able to converge these. But like you said, the key point here is that they are offering choice. So the key take, some people look at it and they see cloud networking vision and they all think, CLIs are now dead. What am I going to do with all my skills? Everything's moving to the cloud. But the reality for this announcement was that they were pretty adamant. This is going to the culmination of the Cisco cloud, or the Cisco network cloud vision, is to have two platforms, one that will operate in the cloud, one that will operate on premises.
Yeah, and operate in a hybrid model if you wanted to.
Correct. Yeah, you can mix and match however you want to. Exactly.
Yeah. One of the questions I have, and it's less a Cisco issue and more kind of a macro issue, is just the organizational structure in large enterprises still largely have security and networking teams operationally separate. Now, Cisco did design the product, so if you are structured that way, the security team can use their thing and the network team can use their thing, but you're still banking on those teams talking together enough that they at least decide on one platform. And I'm not sure the industry is there yet. I suspect we'll eventually get there. Look how long it took us to bring IT OT together, and that was like so obvious, right? So
no,
but that is one thing that could limit their growth opportunities. Just our businesses. I think the mid-sized organizations actually are ready for it, but the really large global companies, are they ready for this kind of change?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's, as typically happens, right? The technology is available first, and then it's the cultural and process changes that need to occur after that. And that just comes down to human nature and people wanting to be able to change or accepting change. The good part is we've seen this time and time again when significant new technologies come out that force that change. When you look at what happened with just even like server virtualization and VMs, right? And you went from all those people, right? We've learned the lesson that it's not good to be a server hugger when server virtualization is becoming the dominant technology and so forth. So I think there's precedent that we can look back on and say, okay, we've seen this before. We know this is going to happen. I think with things like SASE and hybrid work and all this, we've seen, the need for that greater convergence of the network and security teams. And so there's some recognition of it. It is slow. You're starting to see some centers of excellence being created around that convergence and so forth. I think the vendors, like I said, as they're driving the new technology, they could also do a lot to help drive those cultural and process changes as well. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I also think one of the things I asked Chuck Robbins in the analyst Q&A, and you were there during that too, was about their M&A strategy. And because they've historically, augmented their portfolio with a lot of acquisitions, which is actually why they were in this position of having disparate platforms before. So how they maintain the purity of that while they still are able to crank up that innovation engine. And frankly, Cisco's got more money than anybody, right? And so they can continue to buy who they want. And he answered it, I think, in a very thoughtful way. Right now that they've built these platforms out, they're still going to do acquisitions. I don't know if they're going to do as many. I think now that they've got this cloud native platform, they can actually build more stuff quickly themselves. But in theory, if you are cloud native and you buy cloud native, that should integrate much faster than before, where if you're a big monolithic software stack and you buy another monolithic software stack, bringing those two together is very difficult, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing some of the, the differences. It has taken them a while to integrate Meraki. I don't think that was necessarily technical as it was, process
organizational,
and keeping them separate. But things like if you look at Thousand Eyes coming in the last 18 months and the number of integrations that they've been able to achieve as the technology progresses within some of the Cisco platforms, it's really showing, I think, the model of what they're looking for. So when they bring in, when you look at all the Panopticas and all these others that they're bringing in, these new technologies, they're looking for those technologies that can easily be assimilated and distributed across their platforms. So I think that will most likely be a guiding principle for their future M&A activity. But I think we're already starting to see some evidence of that. And like you said, also having that unified leadership under John Davidson to help drive the convergence of those is also going to help as well.
Yeah, and I think this should put an end to that rumor that always pops up that Cisco's going to buy Splunk, right? Splunk is about as old a software stack as there is. And I don't know, every quarter that seems to pop up, I get a call from an equity analyst going, I heard they're going to buy Splunk. Like, I don't think so. One of the things that I talked to the Cube guys about actually is, they are a platform company now. And you brought up Panoptica, right? They had also talked about partnerships they have now with Tufin. They're partnering with Microsoft on the collab side. Whoever would have thought that would have happened? Yep. They were in Apple's keynote at Worldwide Developer Conference. They're doing some security stuff with Apple as well to make. They already have VPN, but I guess for zero trust, making that easier. And to me, this is the definition of a platform. And one of the I've heard the analogy. Oracle's a platform, and they've done a good job of kind of selling the stack. But to me, this is actually taking that to it's a much more open version of that, right? To me, Oracle is an engineered system where if you buy everything Oracle, it works together. And I think what Cisco's striving for is if you buy everything Cisco, it works together, but we're also going to make it easy for you to plug in other companies. Sometimes they'll be competitors to Cisco, but I think they've bought the religion that openness and doing what's best for the customer actually is going to work out for you better in the long run.
Yeah, and that's all the API, right?
Yeah.
Pieces. So enabling organizations. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think they want to be open. They want to be able to work with other vendors, potentially even competing vendors. But they also, what came across clear is they'll leverage these different solutions as they build out these platforms to deliver a 1 + 1 = 3 with Cisco.
Yeah. And what do you think of the security cloud? That like I said, that was announced last year. In your mind, they announced XDR RSA. Cisco Access Cloud this year, which is funny because that's kind of a secure access is that a security product or a network product? But perhaps that's maybe the best example of the two coming together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a SASE perspective, it's great to see. I think they referred to it as their SSE, the secure security edge, right? Services edge. So I think it's great to see again they're rounding out that portfolio and being able to deliver a comprehensive solution. Being able to tie it into. I know a lot of the conversations that I had, given their interest in hybrid work, around how do we deliver both the network and the secure connectivity to those end users, right, to the remote users and workers, and as well as I think one of the other big things that should be noted, right, is that a lot of emphasis also on reimagining what the campus looks like as a
Yeah.
result of everyone being remote and now coming back and wanting to have those consistent experiences and still being able to collaborate and what all that looks like.
Yeah, and again, if you miss the news from the event, the concept of secure access is, and I think this will be great received by users, because right now the analogy they gave was, if you were to, well, actually, I wasn't even crazy with the analogy, but the way people work today, right, is the integration of the access technologies on the user. If you want to access an internet-based app, you do it directly. If you want to access these private apps, you do it through ZTNA or maybe a VPN, but it's really up to the user to figure that stuff out, right? Versus just connect once and have access to everything and then let the network figure that out. Yeah. And I asked G2 why they didn't demo it. He goes, because it's the most boring demo you could ever have. It would just be click a button and start working, and there's nothing really to see. So, but to me, that is
the duck analogy, right?
Yeah.
On the surface, it's nice and calm, and underneath, the feet are going like crazy as it figures out which network connection you have.
But to me, that was a great example of the coming together of networking and security. And I actually do think, I know you kind of follow the security industry a little bit as an adjacent market to networking, but that industry is shifting to platform, and networking is a big part of the telemetry data used by security vendors. Absolutely. And if that really is going that way, there's nobody's that's got more network data than Cisco. So we could finally see this turn the tide.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving to the cloud is only going to help them collect so much more of that.
Yeah.
When you think about the sheer volume of customers they have, the sheer volume of devices they have, that once they start collecting all that information in that cloud, it's really going to accelerate, and it's really going to help those security services as well.
Yeah. And so let's talk Thousand Eyes now. I know you brought this up before. I love Thousand Eyes.
Yeah.
It's and it seems like you well, expand on that. You mentioned how you're starting to see it everywhere now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as we mentioned earlier, right, the modern IT and application environments are becoming so much more distributed, and everything is being connected over the internet. And so with the importance, we've all done research on this, right? Virtually ubiquitously across the board, right? Everyone wants to have end-to-end visibility. No one wants to have blind spots. So being able to leverage a tool that gives you visibility into the internet just makes a ton of sense. It kind of is like basically a no-brainer in this day and age where so much of our network traffic is traversing the internet. So having that visibility, I think, is going to be, I hate to say the word like table stakes, but you really need to have that if you want to be able to operate your environment at its fullest potential.
Yeah, and I don't know of another company that actually has even close to the granularity of information that Thousand Eyes has. And I think one of the things that Cisco's done well with that product is they've dropped the agents into everything, right? Yeah. So now they're available, like, I mentioned the Cisco WebEx endpoints.
Yep.
Those are all Thousand Eyes nodes now. And so if you're a home worker and something's not working, IT can use that data to tell you why. I've talked to Thousand Eyes leadership, and I know they're planning on opening that up and making it more available to more companies. And so I think it's interesting that they've changed a lot of the naming of the products at Cisco. DNA became Catalyst Center, Tele became Catalyst SD-WAN, but the products that they're planning on continuing to use as an ecosystem play, like Thousand Eyes, like Acacia, they've kept those names. And I think that gives you a good sense of how they're planning to leverage these products, right? Yeah.
No, I think like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense. And like you're saying, the interesting part, my interesting takeaway from my conversations with the Thousand Eye team this week was it's almost interesting because they talk about that end-to-end network visibility, but the terms digital experience come up early and often in those conversations.
Yeah.
So it's almost becoming an internet, digital experience platform, if you will.
Yeah. And so is digital experience a security thing or a network thing? Because it's interesting because it seems like more security vendors are selling digital experience monitoring now.
Well, yeah, DEM is part of the SSE stack, right?
Yeah.
So it's
how did that happen?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too when I saw that. I was a little confused about that, but as long as, I guess it doesn't matter where it sits, as long as organizations are leveraging it, and I think Thousand Eyes and others, they talk about the need for the actual monitoring and also the synthetic testing, and I think that's it's a really interesting jumping off point for where like an intersection of AI could come in. If you could just imagine you've got your whole network environment, you've got Thousand Eyes deployed, and now if you could generate synthetic testing models against basically a digital twin, it has some real interesting implications over
Yeah.
time. So not there today, but it would be interesting to see how that works out.
All right. So lastly, I want to talk, what's this mean to the Cisco engineer, right? Like if you're an engineer, you've grown up and you've got your CCIE for networking or your CCIE for security, you've grown up using command line. Some of the stuff, I'm a former CLI person myself. And I remember the first time I tried Meraki, I kind of rolled my eyes and thought, no one's going to use this. It's a toy. And then I tried it and it's like, well, that was pretty fast. Then you go in the dashboard and you look around and go, wow, there's a lot of information in here. And all of a sudden you become a convert, but there's a bunch of them that aren't converts yet. So what's your recommendation to the customer base?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it points to those cultural, right? The technology is now evolving. It's moving to the cloud. And so the customer base has a choice, right? They can continue to embrace the CLIs. And to that end, I think one of the announcements this week was the fact that the Meraki solution, instead of just monitoring, it can actually now do the CLI show commands. So they can get right there. There's a real recognition from Cisco that they need to bring that heavy CCIE installed base along with them on this journey. So I think we'll start to see as that, I don't have details on the roadmap, but I would expect that as the roadmap evolves, you'll see more of that, so that there's more of at least a level of comfort and maybe even the ability to switch back and forth at some point. But clearly their focus is on that Meraki platform. And I think one of the things I would do is, obviously throughout all my years of talking with people, it's always to embrace that change. So I know this is going to be hard and it's going to be, take a lot of time to do that, right? It's not going to happen overnight. But I think one of the first things they can do, when I was talking to the Cisco team, there's a free Meraki trial that they can do that's set up with a sandbox behind it, where organizations, that employees, right, the CIEs can go in and, like you said, just spending some stick time with it and playing with it and getting used to it without having to make any commitment to move to it, I think is a really good first step to be able to understand. And then in that way, they can also help shape the roadmap, right? Because there wasn't a really well-defined roadmap that was put out and saying we're going to do these explicit things. So I think it's a huge opportunity for that base of network engineers to be able to go in, play with it, and provide their feedback and recommendations on how they think would best benefit and accelerate that transformation to the cloud.
I am curious to see, this is something John Davidson and I talked about actually in my meeting with him, is that for the people that want to use CLI, you still can. But what are the use cases where you need to, right? And I remember when I was transitioning my career from a DOS person to a Windows person, the first thing I would do in the morning when I opened up Windows was ring up a DOS prompt.
Yeah.
And you do everything. And then what would happen is over time, you do that less and less because there was just no need.
Correct.
And I think 95% of what a network engineer does, you can do through Meraki, like through the cloud interface, right?
Yeah.
And so I suspect that first there's going to be a lot of people bringing up the CLI command and doing a lot of stuff there, but I think they'll eventually get to the point where they realize they don't have to. And there's always going to be some corner use cases where you're trying to do, something, that's out of the norm and really complicated. You'll need CLI for that. But I'm guessing for the bulk of the engineers, doing things through the web interface is fine. And if you're watching this, I mean, this is an important thing to embrace, because skills, you do need to modernize your skills here. And when I started my career, we took over a lot of the telecom, right? Because of Cisco's VoIP.
Yeah.
And I watched a lot of those folks lose their jobs because they weren't willing to change. So if you're watching this, be willing to change and embrace what Cisco gave you as a way to change without having to go learn a whole new programming language or something like that. It's a pretty easy path forward, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with those sentiments. And, you could also imagine as you move and put more things in the cloud, there'll be a more, I guess, greater involvement of AI technologies and automation that'll be availed to yourself. So, being able to accelerate the troubleshooting process, et cetera, through recommendations. not necessarily saying you have to go to full automation right away based on these recommendations, but I think at least getting on that path, getting familiar, getting comfortable, right? That's the term I hear most often is, how long does it take to get comfortable with these newer technologies? And I think the bottom line is that we know it's coming, we know it's going to be inevitable.
Yeah.
So, it really behooves you to try and, like you said, embrace that and go, like I said, I would go and jump on that trial and start playing with the technology and get yourself familiarized with it.
Actually, there's not a lot to play with. There's a lot of good stuff in there that the learning curve is almost nothing. So, and I'm glad you brought up AI. What did you think of the way they positioned AI? It's like they're not going to hit you over the head with it like an IBM or NVIDIA would, but they did talk a lot about it being an enabling technology for them.
Yeah, I really liked it. I like their approach with the responsible AI. So it's like, hey, we're not going to go throw Chat GTP into the environment and expose your data to everything, right? We're going to take a very ethical, responsible approach to deploying AI. We recognize the value of it, and again, just the inevitable conclusion here is that these environments are getting so much larger and so much more complex that it's impossible to do human correlation of all that data that's coming in. So you're going to need these AI models and things like that to really help you. Some of the large language models, some of the natural language processing, right? That may provide some interesting interfaces where, you come in and you just talk to your computer and the commands are done, right? A la Star Trek and things like that. But I think that, the near term for the network engineering and the security engineer is being able to detect those anomalous activities and things like that much more faster. And then eventually over time, it'll go from just alert and detection, detection and alerting to detection and, alerting and recommendations. And then maybe you get the easy button where you can enact those recommendations after you've done it yourself manually several times. And then eventually it moves into a fully automated state.
Yeah, I don't know if chat, it's funny. When we look back a decade from now at the impact Chat GPT had, was it good or bad for the rise of AI? Because people look at the fact that Chat GPT, they always see that knucklehead lawyer that used it to write a brief or something.
Yeah.
And what I tell people is that when you're using Chat GPT or that type of interface, large language models with Cisco technology, it's a curated data set. It's not the open internet.
Correct.
Right. And I've used the analogy, it's a lot like search. If I want to search for how to get to Bob's house, I can use Google, right? Yeah. But if I want to look up legal precedents, a lawyer doesn't use Google, they use LexisNexis.
Yeah.
A Wall Street broker doesn't use Google, they use Bloomberg or Dow Jones. Correct. And those are built off curated data sets. And so if I'm a Cisco engineer and I want information on what part might fail next, I'm not Googling that. I'm using the AI capabilities that's curated off the Cisco database. And so from that standpoint alone, it's a different experience, right? And
yeah, no, and you bring up a good point, because it's the question of who's using the AI, and certainly the private deployments are there. And I was just having a conversation with my colleague Mike Leone, who covers that space, and saying, now is it the end users that have to deploy the private instantiation of it, or is it going to be the vendors that are supporting them that does it? And certainly in the case like the security networking, it's the vendors like Cisco who will create that private database, right? Collect all that data. They've got years and years of data that they can put into it, right? So they've got a huge database that can help you, but it'll be from that which, right? And that's that, because then you've got that ability to have the citation of where the data is coming from, right? And it's not, you eliminate those hallucinations that ramp up, right? So when your cable breaks, it doesn't come up and say it's because the red car parked in the wrong parking space in the parking lot, right? So
all right, Bob. Well, I think for both of us, it was a more than positive experience.
Absolutely.
It's certainly good to see Cisco moving in this direction after talking about it for a long time. And I understand that these things take a long time to do, especially when you're a company the size of Cisco. But I am expecting more of this in the future. And so, just from an overall product roadmap perspective, I think customers, it's fair to say, should expect to see more innovation faster. Yeah, so,
absolutely. And I think a lot of those customers, right, really, that's the next key point for Cisco, is that they've set the vision, and now the next key is going to be executing against that and delivering those proof points along the roadmap.
Yeah. Anyways, I know you wrote a blog about this. I'll include the link in the description below. I wrote some thoughts on it too for and I'll make sure that's down there below. So anyways, Bob, enjoyed seeing you in Vegas. I'm sure I'll see you at another event in Vegas sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So on behalf of Bob, I'm ZS Caraval from ZK Research. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.